am Joel McLeod.
I'm Roland Tanner.
And welcome to the 905 Roundup, our Thursday episode for the 905er podcast. Great to have you with us today. We've got big news to share with everyone. Do you know what the big news is, Roland?
Tell me, Joel. Tell me. I'm sitting here with bated breath.
You should. I told you yesterday. No, we cracked 10,000 downloads for this little old podcast that could. Which, I mean, we knew we were going to get there, but we didn't expect it would take less than just under a year to do it.
Yeah, and we're coming up on our 90th episode, and 100 is not very far away. So it's amazing how much we've managed to pack into a year. So it's. Yeah, I mean, thanks everybody who's been listening and downloading, and really appreciate the support we've had. And I guess the thing we keep all wanting to say is, this is just the beginning. Starting in the middle of a global pandemic when we couldn't leave the house, certainly wasn't an ideal situation to start anything very much. But I think it's given us it's given us a lot to talk about, that's for sure.
Oh, no doubt.
No shortage of stories. But it's also, I think, given us time to sort of learn the ropes of the thing and think about some ways in which we can hopefully grow and expand and become a kind of fixture of the community in our part of the GTA. Would be nice to see over the next year if we're allowed out anytime soon.
We've talked. You and I have talked off the recorder, just talking about the idea of doing like live shows and just getting out to actually meet people who are listening to the podcast was a big thing. We weren't able to do it obviously because of COVID restriction, but that appears to be coming to an end, or at least a little bit less strict. So we're hoping that definitely within the next year to maybe get out to some of the other communities in the 905. We've had a few invitations from previous guests to show us their haunts and their neck of the woods, and we definitely want to take them up on the offer because, the 905 is such a diverse but unique part of Ontario and a part of Canada that. We always say that we're very similar, but we're also very unique at the same time. And we kind of want to keep bringing those stories to all of you. If you keep listening and help support us, go to our Patreon, give us a little bit of your money, a little bit of your time, and we'll help us grow this into a bigger, more impactful presence in the 905 region.
For sure, yeah, and Consider Patreon, consider supporting us in whatever way. Make sure you tell your friends. And, and just as an illustration of the importance of the stories we're covering. I mean, and we're, in our Thursday roundup, we're usually talking about stories that other people have been the journalists on, and we're just sharing them, making sure everybody's heard about them, having a bit of a discussion around them. But, the two issues we're going to be talking about today are not things that you're really going to find in the national news, but you're not going to find them in the local news either. In many cases, maybe in the Spectator, but not in the to pick at random Burlington Post. And they're important. They're both really important stories that say a lot about our region and the way it is changing, and some of the problems that we have that certainly when it comes to local government just doesn't seem to get enough attention. Some really huge issues there that are systemic across our region that are not getting attention. And
well, the one thing that you and I have noticed is there are systemic issues, but there are also overlapping issues. Everybody wants to think that we're all in these different silos, and everyone's so unique, and we have to have completely different solutions to problems. And really, I found that only helps kind of those in power, because it's easy to say, no, the problem is too big, we can't solve it, when really it's not. The problems that we have that we're facing in our communities are eminently solvable. It just, unfortunately, sometimes the powers that be don't want to take action or to put forward the work that does it, and it might take, you need to have a little bit of coordination, a little bit of power, and a little bit of gumption to, shake the powers that be, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, I think a perennial issue is the slowness of municipal government as a means of achieving positive change that really needs to happen, and that in other parts of the world has been agreed upon, decided. So we lag behind, and we lag behind, I think, in part because it's just not a job that attracts the best people, to be quite frank. Or some of the people who are decent don't stick around too long because they either go up the tree or they go and decide to do something else better paid. And the end result is, because we're not paying attention as a society to local politics, we're paying attention to Ottawa when nothing's happening that really affects us most of the time. Mm-hmm. These local governments can really, some of them can really get out of hand. And I'm yet to find in the 905 at least, a local council that anybody seems to feel is completely working the way it should. And politics always attracts criticism, so maybe that's just not something that's ever going to happen, even with the best local government in the world. But it seems the level of
on that note, Roland, like criticism is part of politics. We're in a democracy. It's our right to criticize our elected leaders, and quite frankly, if you can't handle criticism, then you should not be running for elected office. I agree with what you're saying, that there seems to be a lack of, I'm going to say ambition at the local level. You and I have talked about numerous times over the past year about how COVID has presented real opportunity for systemic change to address some long-standing issues in our society, sustainable housing, social housing, transportation, commuting, work-life balance, all those things that make up life in the 905. We've looked at coming out of this pandemic. There's a real opportunity to say, hey, you know what? Maybe people are willing to tweak around the edges if we can provide, a better work-life balance. We don't have to go commuting. We can maybe give land developers or landlords a break and say, yeah, convert some of your units into residential units, social housing, whatever have you. And I think you mentioned it in the last episode. There just doesn't seem to be any politician at any level who's really talking about this in any meaningful way, which I think is just sad.
Yeah. I mean, I think we as a society need to start taking local politics a lot more seriously. How we do that when our media concentrates on the wrong things. I mean, it's a long-standing issue that we pay attention to politics in reverse proportion to how much it affects our daily life. Mm-hmm. For some reason, Ottawa just is we're all obsessed with Ottawa. I mean, I'm not actually, but on the TV and in the newspapers, that's where all the discussion is. Yeah, I mean, the recent stories, you're talking about the CRTC, that's not something that affects me. Well, maybe it will affect me one day, but as a rule, the average person, that's not a life and death situation. Whereas a hospital, if it's provincial, or, any number of things at a local level, the surfacing on your roads, that these things that
I'll be honest, I think it's a bit of laziness on the media's part. I mean, it's easy right now everybody's talking about, there might be a federal election. Justin Trudeau might call an election. And I'm going to call it right now, people. No, he's not. We're not having a federal election anytime soon. And do you want to know why? Because why? He's effectively running everything in Ottawa as if it's a majority parliament. The Conservatives are not going to take him down. They're more popular. Dirt is more popular than the Conservatives right now in Canada. The NDP do not have any momentum whatsoever. They have no money in the bank. Nobody is going to an election, but yet the mainstream media makes us think, oh, any minute now, Justin Trudeau is going to call an election, and we're all going to be knocking on door. Everybody's going to be knocking on doors. It's not happening. Like there's just, to me, there's no reason to do it. I mean, maybe the Conservatives or the NDP will trigger an election and bring it down. Maybe, but if that's the case, they will be crucified at the polls.
Well, yeah, I think whoever it seems to be the rule that whoever triggers the election pays. And right now it's the Liberals who would be the ones triggering it.
But it's just laziness. You're right. Yeah. Rather than talk about the issues that affect us on a day-to-day life, things of, like how are our cities built? How is transportation being, affecting our lives? How are we able to get around? How are we able to live? Those are more complex stories. And I think it's just partly being lazy to say, let's actually talk about it. What are the issues?
Yeah. Well, coming back to good old Hamilton for a bit, some updates on. I'm getting sick of talking about statues because, and in fact, the only reason we have talked about statues to an extent to say we should be caring about other things, not statues. But here we are. Hamilton had a debate last week about its statue of John A. Macdonald in Gage Park in central Hamilton. And it was a vote. The vote was not to do anything until a report, which is already underway, kind of reports back. Now, a number of councillors, obviously a minority, suggested that maybe the wise thing to do was to, remove the statue while that report was going on. But no, and I think that kind of excuse for why they weren't willing to do anything was very much an excuse on behalf of the more, let's just say conservative, whether it's small c or big C, members of Hamilton Council. So, for instance, everybody's favourite councillor from Waterdown, Judy Partridge lamented the shaming and blaming levelled via social media. Well, so she doesn't like the fact that people are talking about things on social media ahead of votes. Well, too bad. And you know what? People are going to be critical because we're talking about genocide. I mean, when will these people get through their head the scale of what is being said? And I don't think they believe it's genocide because they think Nazi Germany, they think Auschwitz as being the only way in which genocide can exist. And that's just not the case. That's not the definition of the word. Never has been. Partridge also said she needed to have the facts. Well, what more facts do you need? The facts are that these statues are objectionable to a section of society who right now deserves to be given a lot of understanding and credence.
I've never understood. You're right. We've talked about statues probably way too often on this podcast, that to the point where it is exhausting that this conversation is still going on, and yet you just have to wonder why are you who's so passionate about keeping the statue up, right? Like why? And we talked about this before coming on. The fact that a racist a far right racist organizer was able to sneak his way onto the speaking list and to speak in favor of keeping this, this right then and there, if I was a counselor, I'd sit there going, I don't want to be associated with this guy. There's no way I want this guy to use my name or my vote to defend his point of view. Like I just sit there, like the minute that you have this, I forget how this guy snuck on him, because I understand that my understanding of this situation is he listed a name and then he basically said he was speaking to the opposite. He was going to speak in favor of taking the statue down, and they snuck on and he gave this whole thing. And to give, I watched some of the debate at City Hall, and to give councillors credit, there were some councillors saying, how do we strip this from the record? Too bad it's on there. You can't. But like, just if you're a councillor and you're like, oh, maybe we should. The minute you have a guy who is a known far-right, racist, neo-Nazi sympathizer, why would you want to be on the same side as him? That's my question.
Well, yeah, and the argument was that by removing it, it would become a symbol for white supremacists. Well, here's the news. It's already a symbol for white supremacists. Sadly, it is now, for better or worse, these statues have now become rallying points for far-right extremists. So taking it down is the way to take that away, and then it's gone. And you can't have a rallying point that doesn't exist. I just want to point out that the level of the debate that happens in councils like Hamilton. You've got Mayor Fred Eisenberger saying, opposing taking it down at the same time as he says, I'm not particularly married to Sir John A. Macdonald. I've never met the man. Well, no. I hear he's a drunk and in his day was a bumbling fool on many occasions. Again, people are defending the statue, know nothing about the man. I mean, yeah, he did drink a lot at one point in his life. Not his whole life, but for a period in his life. Was he a bumbling fool? No, he wasn't. He was a very smart, ruthless man. One of the most effective politicians probably that Canada has ever had. That doesn't mean he wasn't an evil, genocidal creator of the residential school.
If you think about it, he managed to get both English and French governments and other provinces in Canada at the time to go to hat in hand to the British and say, hey, give us a country. Britain was a superpower at the time. We're not talking, times are very different. They give the guy credit. He knows how to play the game. He's not a bumbling fool. But that's the thing is nobody.
They don't even know the first thing about the people that they're defending.
That's the thing. And it's the reason why these statues were erected in the first place. They weren't erected to educate on the nuance of history or the total historical record. It's to propagate whoever erected it at the time, their narrow-minded view of what a Canadian ought to be, which is why you don't see too many modern-day statues being erected, because I think right now the idea of Canadianism is very fluid. It's being redefined through immigration, our reconciliation with the past, and where we want to go in the future. That being said, you're right. It comes back to this has been turned into a rallying point for racists and just people that I don't think any government wants to associate with. Why would you just put yourself in a position where you are helping to defend these people, and you can use I'll defend your right to say what you want, but that's not what this is about. This is, you are taking the side of racists in this argument. And I think if you do that, you really have to just double check yourself. And it's a statue, for crying out loud. It's just a piece of metal. Let's put it in context here. It's just a statue.
And it's, when you focus on Macdonald, you miss the point still, because Macdonald is a symbol of Canada in that point in its history and for about 100 years afterwards, and still continuing to this day in some regards, as a product of British imperialism, of a mentality that said we as a nation and as a race have the right to go anywhere in the world and civilize it, in heavily inverted commas. And whoever we find in that way better get out of the way, because they can't stand in the way of progress, as it was seen then. It's the constant being dragged away in the wrong direction by these arguments of what about John A., this guy I don't know the first thing about? We can't lose the history of someone I am completely ignorant of. You can't make this stuff up, And this ties into a horrendous incident yesterday in Hamilton, which already has a reputation as being one of the more racist cities in Canada, in terms of white supremacists and such, of a really violent and dangerous assault, as it sounds, on a Muslim family in Ancaster, I believe. Someone has been arrested, and of course it's before the courts now, so all the usual things apply in terms of it being an alleged hate crime. But the report certainly suggests it is worryingly similar in many regards to what happened in London, just without the same fatal outcome. It seems I took part in a Zoom call a couple of days ago, something to do with street harassment of women and non-binary people and people of visible minorities. As usual, there's really one type of person who isn't a potential victim of street harassment, and that's people who look like me. But anyway, one of the points raised during that was that all kinds of hateful abuse have increased dramatically during COVID. So racism, violence against women, what seemed like repeated verbal attacks on Muslims, people Asian from Asian backgrounds. I mean, I don't understand quite what it is about COVID that would make this happen, other than giving people more time to do horrible things. I don't know, but and I guess stress isn't much of an excuse.
The issue against Asian Canadians is the fact that Wuhan, China was the kind of ground zero for COVID, so it's it's what the ignorant do, right? Oh, I get to go and attack Asian Canadians because clearly clearly they must be the originators of COVID. They're the fault for all this, when Asian Canadians have literally built this country from the railways up. But I mean, to tie your point that you're making into the statute debate, again, when you're allowing these statutes to become focal points for far right, racist, neo-Nazi defenders, it emboldens them. Like when you sit there and you twiddle your thumbs and they see the fear in your eyes. And I'm speaking to city councilors across the 905. If you happen to be listening, they see the fear in your eyes. They see, oh, you're weak. You think you're being strong. You're thinking you're trying to find a compromise. They say, no, you're weak on this. You're somebody that I can exploit, because you'll be so scared of losing image that you won't stand for anything. You won't stand for those who have been marginalized the most throughout Canada's history. That would include the Indigenous people who were here first, immigrants, Asians, Black Canadians, African Canadians, immigrants, East Indian descendants. All these people that now make up the fabric of our country, they all become targets of this. We've got to start taking on the walls. Like, oh, this is about First Nations. It is, but it's also about much more than that. And you can't, it's something on this, you can't wish Willy wash, and there's no middle ground. Because if you give these people the middle ground, they will not only take it, they will ask for more.
And we have to do a better job of educating the young. I mean, this hatred comes from one place, unfortunately. Again, it comes from a place that looks like me, overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly male. And I think it's resentment of having been born into a position where things are easy, and seeing a world where you have to compete the same as everybody else mm-hmm. for whatever you get. And not having that kind of, having the ladder that you had that nobody else had taken away from you. And this is all about, the ultimate objective is that everybody is treated equally, and a lot of white people really, really hate that. And they may not think of it consciously like that, but they see things that they could do, whether it's driving a big SUV or it's whatever it is,
The worst mistake that you can do if you're a white person is assume that everybody's equal, because there's great inequalities across this country. And when you go to try and equalize that, when you go and try to say, okay, how do we take away barriers? It's not about giving those who are removing the barriers for it, they're not getting placed further ahead on the starting line. They're being brought up to the starting line is what that's about. They're being brought up to start at the same place that we did. And they have this, then after that, once the gun is fired, they have the same opportunities as you and I and everyone else to get ahead in this country. And when they do get ahead, then it should be that we all get ahead. Where our economy is better, our society is better, our country is better. And sometimes to help this country get ahead, it means you might have to take down a statue.
Well, let's move on to another important story. And we've spoken a few times about the Pointer, thepointer.com, for anybody who's interested, which covers news in Brampton and Mississauga. And some of the really good journalism they're doing that is almost unparalleled in the 905 in terms of real quality journalism. And they have very much been at the forefront of uncovering what appears likely to be a major scandal at Brampton City Hall under the mayorship of Patrick Brown and the city manager that he appointed, and everything that's come from that, including the firing of a whistleblower, the alleged intervention of the mayor himself in that firing. Again, everything comes with an alleged, because it's these are all accusations that have been made. But certainly someone who raised serious questions about what was happening at City Hall was immediately fired, and that has led to an investigation being put in place. But it was an investigation that was undermined by the way in which it was brought into being, and undermined by given sort of 30 days to investigate a very wide-ranging number of allegations that have been made. And as it's turned out, that those 30 days aren't nearly enough to do the job that's required.
Well, I should point out that the investigator that was hired to do the conduct, which was Deloitte, they themselves said we can't do that in this time frame. I thought the other interesting aspect was the fact that the 30 days limit was brought in through in-camera committee meetings. Like nobody knows how this number got to where it was. Like that, and that's that's something another trend that we've noticed across the 905 over the past year is how many times city council, and I'm going to include also we've discovered school board meetings, go into in-camera meetings really. And kind of like we want to save our own hide meetings, as opposed to like the in-camera meeting originally. I mean, the concept behind it was you're going to hire a high-profile position, like a city manager, chief accounting officer, a director of education, that kind of thing. Somebody who's really high profile, lots of a high salary attached to the position, lots of responsibility, responsible for millions, maybe even not billions, but hundreds of millions of dollars in budget. How many jobs and careers are under their responsibility. These are big jobs to fill. So I can understand you get your applications and your council or your board goes in cameras to have a free and open discussion on what do you think of this person? Did you like them? Did they have the right qualifications? But I think we're gonna have a hard time working with them. They just seemed really aloof. I don't trust it. That kind of stuff. And you have those free conversations, free from public scrutiny. That's kind of what it's there for. Those kind of discussions. They're not meant to. I want to be able to say something that nobody can call me on.
Yeah, I mean, the Municipal Act allows in-camera meetings for a very restricted range of things. So, yeah, personally identifiable employment things. Mm-hmm. The second one is legal items that where speaking in public would literally prejudice a court case. The obvious example of that is very often developments that are going to LPAT have to be dealt with it. I mean, we're seeing this all the time in Burlington at the moment, and they have no choice. Those have to be in camera because they're literally discussing things that if they were done in the open, the developer would then be able to use against the city. So sure, you get that. However, the extent to which in-camera meetings are used across the GTA, again, Hamilton is one of the uses them at an astonishing rate. To do so many things. I mean, and that can be, the thing is that, the argument can be made, say, for example, that anything to do with salaries or compensation has to be in camera because, well, that's employment, right? And we said employment is connected to people, so that no. It's only if it's personally identifiable. A general discussion of salary is not something that should ever go into camera. And the same goes for, a sewage leak into a creek, say, for example, or
yes.
a dangerous road. Those are not things that need to be in camera or that should be in camera. And the thing is, again, there's no real appeals process for this, right? I mean, there are a few people, like Joey Coleman, another friend of the podcast, is one of the few people who have pursued these things because he's that determined, and good for him. But what happens even if you do win? Well, not very much. These are the things where there should be a much more rigorous oversight of municipalities. There needs to be a real kind of referee with teeth, if you like, who can quickly react to say, no, that shouldn't have been in camera. Release whatever you did in that meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So again, this was classically the discussions. Some of the councillors have basically said, as openly as they are able, we don't think this should have been done in camera. Some of the discussions leading up to this investigation. However, the minute it's gone in camera, they can't now. They can't even put their own point of view in that it shouldn't be in camera after it's gone into camera, because they're then breaking the law. So you get this crazy situation of someone kind of hinting strongly, but not actually saying.
What strikes me is that I know we mentioned Ottawa at the start of this podcast, but this might be a good way to kind of have a juxtaposition. If you look at in Ottawa, you have MPs who go into committee hearings to discuss the affairs of the day, legislation, etc. Right now, the Liberals are getting blasted because they're filibustering in the committee requests for documentation and to have witnesses come before a committee, and they're filibustering it. We can debate the legitimacy of the filibuster on a different episode. Probably not going to do that. But my point being, this is all out in the public. We know what's going on. We know we can put names in that committee to who is doing what, who is saying what. This is all on the record. If in a in-camera meeting, hypothetically, a counselor decides to use racist, derogatory, sexist terminology, if they just start, bad-mouthing and acting completely inappropriate in a professional setting, we don't know about that. The other counselors might know about that, but they can't say anything about it. They can't tell us about it. They can't do that because, you're right, they break the law. And there's something very undemocratic about this tool that is, understandably, it's meant for really specific uses being used in this way, which is clearly meant as a political tool to start covering people's butts for a bad decision.
I'm a big fan of comparing how different countries do the same thing. So this is another one of my examples from Britain. I'm definitely not using it as an example of good practice. I'm just using it as an example of how different things can be. So the town of Southend, I believe, Southend on Sea, is just north of London in Essex. About the same size as Burlington, about 180,000 citizens or residents. Do you want to guess how many councillors they have?
How many?
So, for context, Burlington has 6 councillors, 1 mayor. They have 37 councillors. So I think I'm not saying that's what we want necessarily.
Burlington, but
yeah, I think somewhere in the middle is the right balance. But the other thing is that the completely different way they do things is that those councillors are aligned. Well, about a third are independent, about 2/3 are aligned with political parties. But then you have a situation which is much more like the local council operates more like a government, and that the in-camera meetings to an extent are brought about because that's the only time people can actually talk. Well, if you run a government, the cabinet doesn't publish its discussions. Those are private discussions about what they want to do. They then have to get it passed in a vote, but the vote is public, so you know who's siding with what, right? And it seems again that the way that we've created municipal government in Canada has an awful lot of shortcomings in terms of the weakness of the people that we elect compared with the staff. And when we talk about in-camera meetings, it's not just the councillors who are the bad guys here. Very often is definitely beneficial to city staff to have something done in private rather than in public. And those are tools that city managers or whoever, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody in particular, the city managers, the city clerk, people like that can basically use the procedures in their own favour. Mm-hmm. And because we have this weak council system, that can all happen with very little oversight and with very little very little recourse against whatever decisions are made. I think we just have to. I'm not saying that we should tear up the book and start over, but there's something not right with the way our councils are working, and it's certainly
it requires the people to start paying closer attention. One of the things we were hoping to do with this podcast is kind of broaden the debate instead of like the binary arguments of, pro-development, anti-development, pro-transit, anti-transit, just this pro and con, and have a little bit more nuanced idea of how do we want our cities to grow. Which is, we had on Graham Crawford of I Elect Hamilton. I'm curious to see what that movement does in terms of a grassroots movement to kind of reshape how a city council functions to not only attract business but to develop and promote a more sustainable city. Because when it comes down to it, I think it's just that we need better quality people. Quite frankly, we need people who are ambitious and thinking ahead. With a little bit of humility to say, okay, yeah, I screwed up here. I'm not going to, I'm not. I think that mixture will go infinitely further in making our cities a better places to live.
Yeah, I mean, I think ranked ballots would have gone a long way. I think a few more councillors. I think we are underrepresented. In Ontario, and you can say, but the cost. Well, the fact is, in Burlington, where they got rid of half their council a decade or so ago, you still spend the same amount because they just doubled the salary of the councillors they still have because they're working full time now. Councillors still is in many cities considered a part-time job. I think I read that the councillors in London, Ontario, who've seemed to be quite often one of the first ranked ballot city, and as it will turn out, the only ranked ballot city, sadly, has been really good. Those guys get paid something like $12,000 a year to be basically full-time employees of the city as councillors. I mean, they're paid a real pittance. As a result, they're going to lose some of their best councillors.
I don't think that's an argument. I mean, we're talking these cities have hundreds of millions of dollars in budget. We're not talking about gold-plated helicopters flying councillors in from their wards to city council meetings. you pay them what they deserve. Counselors should be a full-time job, right? Like,
if you look at the sunshine list for any city, it's not the councillors who are taking up the bulk of the money. I will leave it to others to go and look at the sunshine list for your city to find out who does take a lot of the money. And it might surprise you who it is. It ain't the city manager either, usually, although he or she will be one of the higher paid people. Well, anyway, I mean, certainly what's happening in Brampton is a really big deal. I mean, the accusations, and again, the money that goes into, if you look at cities wasting money, look at some of the consulting firms they hire. For instance, Brampton hired a company called the Means Company that was personally known to Brown through his time in the Conservative Party. There was no bidding on it. It was a non-tender. It wasn't tendered, and they had no experience in the area that they were hired for, and they were paid $300,000 compared to a councillor's salary. That's small potatoes. So more democracy is never a bad thing, I think.
Well, that's a good way to end off the podcast. So let's call it quits for this day. Thank you everyone for listening. We will be back on Tuesday with another episode. Have a great day. That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.
Looking to make the most out of this life and optimize your personal wellness? Then check out the Natural Man Podcast. Join me, host Mike C., as we explore all areas of human wellness, physical, mental, and emotional. Learn strategies to optimize your own well-being and be in the driver's seat of your own health. Remember, your doctor works for you. Learn biohacks, neurohacks, ways to improve sleep, and ways to optimize your body and your mind. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, the Fountain app, and at naturalmanpodcast.com.